When Eleanor Walsh approached me with tears streaming down her well-powdered cheeks at her daughter's lavish wedding reception, I simply smiled, handed her an envelope, and whispered, "Congratulations on selling my properties. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Here's something for you to sign." Her triumphant expression crumbled as she scanned the legal document inside, a court order requiring her to repay $1.3 million plus damages for fraudulent property sales. The string quartet played softly as I clinked my champagne glass against hers, now frozen midair. "Family is everything, isn't it, Eleanor?" I said, watching the realization dawn in her eyes that I'd known all along, and more importantly, that I'd been prepared. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when I first suspected something was wrong with my investment properties. I'd built my portfolio methodically over 8 years, a small apartment building on Riverside Drive, a row of townhomes in the Oakwood district, and my newest acquisition, the Cedar Heights duplex. After leaving my corporate finance job, these properties had become my livelihood, my independence, and my future. I met Jack Walsh at an economic development conference where he was speaking about sustainable urban housing. Tall, articulate, with gentle eyes that crinkled when he laughed, Jack represented everything my analytical mind hadn't realized my heart was searching for. Our courtship was swift. Drinks after the conference led to dinner the following week, which led to weekend hikes and midweek phone calls that stretched into the early morning hours. 6 months later, he proposed during a property walkthrough of what would become the Cedar Heights duplex. "You're inspecting your next investment while I'm trying to propose," he'd laughed, down on one knee in the empty living room with peeling wallpaper and outdated fixtures. "I can multitask," I'd replied, accepting both the ring and making an offer on the property that same day. Jack came from what he modestly called comfortable means, which I later discovered was a significant understatement. The Walsh family had old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. His father, Howard, was largely absent from family affairs, a gentleman who deferred to his wife in all matters of consequence. And then there was Eleanor, perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed, and perpetually dissatisfied. From our first meeting, Eleanor made her assessment clear. I was not what she had envisioned for her only son. My practical pantsuits and focus on cash flow projections failed to impress a woman who measured worth in family names and social connections. My background, state university education, middle-class parents, self-made success, was something I took pride in. Eleanor viewed it as something to overcome. "Melissa has quite the entrepreneurial spirit," she'd say at family gatherings, the compliment hollowed by her tone. "So independent. Not many young women would choose real estate investment over more traditional pursuits." I'd smile and discuss cap rates while she winced. Despite this underlying tension, the first 2 years of marriage were largely happy. Jack and I established our home in Pine Ridge Estates, close enough to his family for occasional Sunday dinners, but far enough to maintain our independence. I continued growing my real estate portfolio while Jack thrived in his urban planning consultancy. We settled into a rhythm of professional success and personal contentment, navigating Eleanor's subtle disapproval with a united front. Everything changed when Sophia, Jack's younger sister, announced her engagement to Nathan Chen, the son of a prominent family whose approval even Eleanor couldn't question. Sophia had always been the golden child, beautiful, charming, and completely aligned with Eleanor's values and expectations. Where Eleanor had resigned herself to Jack's practical choice in a wife, she had grand visions for her daughter's wedding. "The Chens expect a certain standard," Eleanor explained during a family dinner 6 months before the wedding date. "We'll be hosting at Lakeside Country Club, of course. 400 guests minimum." I nearly choked on my wine. 400? That seems excessive. Eleanor's smile tightened. "It's appropriate for families of our standing. The initial estimates are coming in around 300,000. Even Jack seemed surprised. That's substantial, Mother. Howard simply nodded, eyes on his plate. We've always set aside funds for the children's weddings, Eleanor continued smoothly. Though with the current market conditions, our investments haven't performed as expected. The conversation moved on, but something in Eleanor's calculated glance my way lingered in my mind. That night, reviewing my quarterly property reports, I noticed a small discrepancy in the tenant payment records for the Riverside apartments. 3 units showed rent deposits redirected through a different processing account. My property manager, Victor, had no explanation. The system shows the standard account routing number, he confirmed by phone. Nothing's changed on our end. The discrepancy was small, about $3,600 in total, but in my experience, financial irregularities were like cockroaches. Where you saw one, dozens lurked in the shadows. I made a note to perform a complete audit that weekend, then became distracted by wedding planning obligations as Eleanor insisted I join Sophia for bridesmaids' dress fittings. 2 weeks later, a call from my bank's fraud department brought everything into sharp focus. Ms. Anderson, this is Heather from Horizon Financial. We're calling about some unusual withdrawal authorizations against your equity line for the Oakwood property. My heart quickened. I haven't authorized any withdrawals. Our system flagged a request for $75,000. The authorization form had your signature, but the request came through an unusual channel. Decline it immediately, I instructed, already pulling up my investment accounts on my laptop, and freeze any transactions until I arrive in person. 3 hours at the bank confirmed my worst fears. Someone had attempted to access equity from my properties through forged authorization forms. The bank had caught this attempt, but my own investigation revealed something far more disturbing. This wasn't the first attempt, just the first one large enough to trigger the fraud alert. Looking through 6 months of transactions, I discovered nearly $180,000 had been siphoned from my properties through a complex series of small withdrawals, redirected rental payments, and equity line advances. The signature on every authorization form was a reasonable approximation of my own. That evening, I laid the evidence before Jack in our home office, spreadsheets and bank statements covering every surface. Someone is systematically stealing from my properties, I explained, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. The authorization forms have forged signatures. I've already filed a police report. Jack examined the documents, forehead creased with concern. Do they have any leads? Not yet. The detective thinks it's someone with access to my personal information. Someone who knows my accounts, my properties, my signature. A disgruntled tenant? Former employee? I hesitated, the question I'd been avoiding now unavoidable. The withdrawals began exactly 1 week after your sister's engagement was announced, and several of the transferred funds were routed through an account at First National. Jack stared blankly. What's significant about First National? Your mother is on the board of directors. They sponsor her charity galas every year. His expression hardened. You can't possibly think my mother would steal from you. I'm not accusing anyone, I said carefully. I'm following the evidence, and I need your support while I get to the bottom of this. Jack pushed away from the desk. My mother has her own money. She wouldn't need to take yours. There must be another explanation. That night, Jack slept in the guest room. The distance between us felt greater than the wall separating our beds. The woman who had built her career analyzing numbers and calculating risks now faced her greatest challenge, proving a theft without destroying her marriage in the process. The following week brought more discoveries. Meeting with my attorney, Diane Cooper revealed that someone had been making inquiries about the ownership structure of my properties. The title company called to verify some information, Diane explained in her sparse, efficient office. Someone claiming to represent you asked about transferring ownership or adding parties to the deeds. I never authorized that. Diane nodded, her expression serious. I know, That's why they called me directly? She hesitated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Melissa, are you and Jack having financial difficulties? Sometimes in marriages. Jack has no financial interest in my properties, I interrupted. That was deliberate, by mutual agreement. His finances are separate from my investment portfolio. Smart, Diane acknowledged, but someone is very interested in changing that arrangement. I left Diane's office with a plan. First, I would place additional legal safeguards on all my properties, restrictive covenants that would make transfers of ownership impossible without multiple levels of verification. Second, I needed more information about the attempted fraud, which meant gaining access to records only the police could obtain. And third, I needed allies who could help me navigate the personal minefield this investigation had become. Thomas Franklin, my real estate agent for 6 years and one of the few people I trusted implicitly, agreed to meet me for coffee. The trendy downtown cafe was far from Eleanor's social circuit, allowing us to speak freely. The market's too hot right now for these properties to be underperforming, Thomas confirmed, reviewing my financial statements. Especially the Riverside units. Those should be generating at least 12% more income than what's showing here. Someone's skimming, I said. But that's just part of it. I'm more concerned about the ownership inquiries. Thomas's expression grew serious. In this market, properties like yours are gold mines. If someone could get their name on the deed, even as a partial owner, they could leverage that equity for significant funds. He paused. This feels targeted, Melissa. Not random fraud. I know. I stirred my untouched coffee. The timing aligns perfectly with Sophia's engagement announcement and the beginning of wedding planning. You think your mother-in-law is trying to use your properties to fund the wedding? His disbelief was evident. I think someone is, and I need to know for certain before I make any accusations. That evening, I made an excuse to miss the weekly family dinner, claiming a meeting with tenants. Instead, I drove to the county records office, arriving just before closing. Grace Perkins, the clerk I'd befriended during my years of property acquisitions, agreed to stay late. I need to see any recent activity on my properties, I explained. Any inquiries, title searches, anything. Grace's expression was troubled. As she pulled up the records, there have been several, she confirmed. Title searches, ownership verification, lien assessments, all within the last 3 months. Who requested them? She hesitated. Most came through Walsh Family Investments, LLC. The family investment company. Eleanor Walsh was the managing partner. Is there anything else I should know, Grace? She glanced around the empty office, then lowered her voice. There were transfer documents prepared for all 3 properties last month. They weren't filed, they couldn't be without your notarized signature, but they were drawn up. The new owner would have been the Walsh Family Trust, with Eleanor Walsh as trustee. My stomach clenched. Thank you, Grace. I need copies of everything. Armed with this evidence, I still hesitated to confront Eleanor directly. Without understanding the full scope of what she'd attempted, any confrontation would allow her to create alternate explanations. I needed irrefutable proof, and for that, I needed access to communications I didn't have. The opportunity came unexpectedly through Carol Hudson, Eleanor's friend and fellow charity board member. Carol called me directly, something she'd never done before. Melissa, dear, I'm helping with the wedding flower arrangements, and Eleanor mentioned you're handling the deposit. I have the final quote here. I'm sorry, what deposit? I asked, genuinely confused. Carol paused. For the wedding flowers. Eleanor said you'd agreed to cover them as your gift to Sophia. It's quite generous, $48,000 for the ceremony and reception arrangements. The pieces clicked together. Carol, I never agreed to pay for the flowers. Eleanor didn't discuss this with me at all. Oh. Her embarrassment was palpable. There must be some confusion. Eleanor was quite specific. She's been telling everyone you've been extremely generous with wedding costs, given your investment success. After reassuring Carol that she'd done nothing wrong, I ended the call and immediately began checking with other vendors. A pattern emerged. Eleanor had committed my name and funds to nearly $200,000 in wedding expenses without my knowledge or consent. The florist, the band, the custom champagne, the ice sculptures, all had been promised payment from Melissa Anderson's accounts. The scope of Eleanor's deception was breathtaking. Not only had she attempted to access equity from my properties, but she'd also committed me to massive wedding expenses without my knowledge. But why? The Walsh family had money. Not liquid enough for Eleanor's grand plans, perhaps, but certainly enough to avoid theft. The final piece fell into place the following day. Jack called from his office, his voice strained. "Have you been investigating my mother?" I took a breath. "I've been investigating who's been stealing from my properties and forging my signature. The evidence points to Eleanor." "Damn it, Melissa. These accusations are tearing the family apart." "Mother just called me in tears." "What exactly did she say?" I kept my voice calm, sensing a critical moment. "That you've been making wild accusations. That you're jealous of the attention Sophia's wedding is getting. That you've never fit into this family and now you're trying to create drama during Sophia's big moment. Has she denied the forgery, the property inquiries, using my name with vendors without my consent?" A pause. "She says there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding expenses, and she was only exploring options with the properties because you'd mentioned wanting to help with Sophia's wedding." "That's a lie, Jack. I never offered my properties or any large sum for the wedding. You know that. Maybe you said something casually that she misinterpreted." "Stop." My patience snapped. "I've never discussed leveraging my properties for Sophia's wedding. Not once. Not ever." Jack's voice hardened. "So my mother is a liar and a thief? Is that what you're saying?" "The evidence says that, Jack. I'm just following where it leads." The call ended with Jack demanding time to speak with his mother directly. I agreed, but with one stipulation: I would present all my evidence to the entire family the following evening. No more secrets, no more manipulation. That night, alone in our house with Jack still gone, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Property records show restrictions were added last week. Smart move. Back off now, and those stay private. Push this, and everything comes. Out. Family handles family affairs privately." The threat only confirmed what I already knew. Eleanor had discovered my legal safeguards and was now attempting intimidation. What she didn't realize was that those restrictions were far more significant than she understood. Working with Diane, I had added a complex series of legal provisions to all my property deeds. Any transaction would require multiple forms of identity verification, in-person notarization with video recording, and a 30-day holding period during which various parties, including the district attorney's office, would be notified of the pending change. More importantly, I had added a fraud protection clause that automatically triggered a criminal investigation if any unauthorized attempt to transfer ownership occurred. The final family dinner before Sophia's wedding took place at Maple Grove, the Walsh family estate. The tension was palpable as Howard, Eleanor, Jack, Sophia, and her fiancé Nathan gathered in the formal dining room. I arrived last, carrying a leather portfolio. Eleanor's greeting was arctic. "How kind of you to join us, Melissa. We were beginning to wonder if you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," I replied pleasantly, taking my seat beside a visibly uncomfortable Jack. Dinner proceeded, with strained conversation about wedding details. Sophia chattered excitedly about the ice sculpture delivery and the custom champagne flutes, while Nathan looked increasingly bewildered by the extravagance. Howard said little, as usual, while Eleanor maintained her perfect hostess facade. As dessert was served, Eleanor addressed me directly. Jack mentioned you have some concerns about wedding expenses. I'm sure we can clear up any confusion. Privately. Actually, I said, opening my portfolio, this concerns everyone at the table. I distributed copies of a document to each person. This is a summary of unauthorized financial activities involving my properties over the past 3 months. It includes forged signatures, fraudulent equity withdrawals, and unauthorized commitments made in my name. Eleanor's face flushed. This is absurd. I've already filed reports with the police, the district attorney's office, and the state real estate commission. I continued calmly. The evidence is conclusive, Eleanor. You've committed multiple felonies in an attempt to access my property equity without my consent. Mother? Sophia's voice was small. What is she talking about? Eleanor's composure cracked. I was securing your future. Your wedding deserves to be spectacular. The Chens expect it. Our standing in the community demands it. By stealing from me? I asked. Those properties should have been family investments from the beginning, Eleanor snapped. Jack's wife's assets should benefit the entire family. I was merely correcting an imbalance. Jack stared at his mother, the truth finally sinking in. You forged Melissa's signature? You tried to transfer her properties to the family trust? For Sophia's wedding. For appearances. For our family name. Eleanor's justifications tumbled out. Our investment accounts are tied up for at least 6 months. The wedding couldn't wait. Melissa has all these properties just sitting there, generating income she doesn't even need. Stop. Howard's quiet voice cut through the room. In 15 years of marriage to Eleanor, it was perhaps the first time he'd directly contradicted her. What have you done, Eleanor? The facade crumbled entirely. Eleanor admitted everything, the forged signatures, the redirected rental income, the equity withdrawal attempts, the unauthorized commitments to vendors. All to fund a wedding extravagant enough to impress the Chen family and maintain the Walsh social standing. We'll pay it back, Howard said firmly. Every penny. And we'll face whatever legal consequences come. Eleanor paled. Howard, you can't mean enough, he said. You've violated our daughter-in-law's trust and broken the law. This ends now. As the family processed this revelation, I explained. The title restrictions I'd placed on my properties, not just to prevent theft, but to guarantee that when triggered by fraud, a complete investigation would follow. The restrictions have already been activated, I told them. The attempted transfers Eleanor initiated triggered automatic notifications to authorities. That's why I have all this evidence. The system worked exactly as designed. In the days that followed, Howard made arrangements to repay all stolen funds and cover all wedding expenses legitimately. The wedding proceeded, scaled back somewhat, but still elegant. Jack and I attended, our relationship strained but intact, both of us processing Eleanor's betrayal in our own ways. Which brings me back to that moment at the wedding reception, where I handed Eleanor the envelope containing not just the court order for repayment, but also a second document, a family counseling arrangement I'd set up and paid for. Because despite everything, Jack loved his mother, and I loved Jack enough to offer a path toward healing, however difficult that path might be. As I watched Eleanor cross the reception hall toward Howard, envelope clutched in her trembling hand, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a weary relief that the truth was finally in the open, and with it, the possibility of something more honest in its place. 3 months after the wedding, Jack and I sit across from Eleanor and Howard in our first joint counseling session. The road ahead is long, the trust shattered, but we're here, talking, listening, beginning the work of rebuilding what Eleanor's actions nearly destroyed. My properties remain securely mine, the title restrictions a permanent reminder that boundaries matter, that independence has value, and that even in marriage, some things remain separately held, not out of selfishness, but self-preservation. The thing about property law, I tell the therapist, finding unexpected wisdom in the metaphor, is that clear boundaries don't divide us. They allow us to be neighbors instead of adversaries. They let us know exactly where we stand. Eleanor meets my eyes for the first time in months without hostility or shame. It's a small step on a long journey, but as a woman who built her life calculating investment returns, I recognize the value of small, steady appreciations over time. The next morning, I sat alone in our home office surrounded by property documents, bank statements, and legal pads filled with calculations. Sleep had been elusive, my mind continuously circling back to Eleanor's possible motives and Jack's wounded expression. The spreadsheets before me told a story clearer than any conversation could: systematic attempts to access my property equity through increasingly sophisticated methods. What had begun with redirected rental payments had escalated to forged authorization forms and fraudulent title inquiries. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Staying at David's place tonight. Need time to think." David, his college roommate, had always offered a sympathetic ear during our occasional disagreements. But this was different. This wasn't a disagreement about vacation plans or kitchen renovations. This was his mother potentially committing financial fraud against his wife. I poured another cup of coffee and called Diane. "I need everything you have on Eleanor's inquiries about my properties," I said without preamble. "And I need to know what other protections I can put in place immediately." "I've been expecting your call," Diane replied. "My assistant is pulling the records now. Can you come to my office at 11? The law offices of Cooper and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a sleek downtown building with views of Lakeside Park. Diane's corner office reflected her personality: organized, elegant, and unapologetically powerful. Large windows illuminated the space, casting light on the array of documents spread across her conference table. "These are all the inquiries made about your properties in the last 6 months," she explained, gesturing to the left side of the table. "And these," she pointed to a smaller stack, "are the attempted changes to ownership structures that were flagged by either the title company or the county records office." I leafed through the documents, each page confirming my suspicions. Multiple inquiries about ownership structure, questions about lien status, requests for property valuation assessments. Most of these came directly from Walsh Family Investments, I noted, recognizing the letterhead. "Yes," Diane agreed, "but there's more. Look at the signature authorizing these inquiries." I examined the forms more closely. Howard Walsh, but Eleanor runs their family investments. Howard's never been involved in the day-to-day operations. Exactly. Diane's expression was grim. And according to my contact at the records office, the signature doesn't match Howard's on file. It appears Eleanor has been forging her husband's signature as well as yours. The realization hit me with unexpected force. Eleanor wasn't just attempting to defraud me. She was involving her husband in her schemes without his knowledge. The depth of deception was staggering. "What's your next move?" Diane asked, watching me process this information. "I need more proof," I replied. "These inquiries are suspicious, but they don't definitively prove theft or transfer attempts. I need access to Eleanor's communications, bank records showing where the redirected funds went." "That would require law enforcement involvement," Diane cautioned. "Are you prepared to take this to the police? It would likely destroy your relationship with Jack's family." I thought of Jack's text, his absence from our home, the distance that had grown between us since I'd first voiced my suspicions. "Eleanor is already destroying this family with her actions. I'm just bringing them to light." Diane nodded. "Then let's proceed methodically. First, we need to secure your properties with additional legal protections. I've drafted restrictive covenants that will make any transfer of ownership impossible without multiple levels of verification." She passed me several legal documents, explaining each protection in detail. Special provisions requiring in-person verification with video recording. A 30-day holding period for any ownership changes. Automatic notifications to specified parties, including the district attorney's office, for any attempted transfers. This is thorough, I acknowledged, signing where indicated. It's necessary, Diane replied. These restrictions won't just protect your assets. They'll act as a tripwire. If anyone attempts to circumvent them, it automatically triggers an investigation. That might be exactly what we need, I said, a plan beginning to form. If Eleanor tries again and triggers these protections, we'll have irrefutable evidence. It's risky, Diane warned. You'd essentially be setting a trap and waiting for her to spring it. Sometimes you need to let the mouse take the cheese before you can close the trap. The coldness in my voice surprised even me. This calculated approach felt foreign to my usual direct methods, but Eleanor had forced my hand. I left Diane's office with the new protections in place and a strategy taking shape. Rather than confronting Eleanor immediately, I would create an opportunity for her to reveal her intentions more fully. The approach required patience, not my strongest virtue, but one I'd cultivated through years of property investment. My next stop was Horizon Financial Group, where I met with the fraud department supervisor who had flagged the suspicious withdrawal request. Heather Kim was petite with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. We've placed alerts on all your accounts, she confirmed. Any unusual activity will be flagged immediately. But I should caution you, if someone has access to your personal information and can forge your signature this convincingly, they might find other avenues. What would you recommend? Credit monitoring services for a start, and consider setting up a separate account at a different bank for any new transactions until this is resolved. Heather hesitated. Ms. Anderson, in my experience, this type of targeted financial fraud usually comes from someone close to the victim, someone with access to personal information, signature samples, knowledge of financial holdings. I'm aware, I replied grimly. Family matters can be complicated, she added delicately. If you need additional resources, we partner with several organizations that provide support during financial investigations. I thanked her for the information, appreciating her tactful approach to what was clearly a familial dispute. As I left the bank, my phone rang with an unknown number. Ms. Anderson? This is Detective Marcus Reynolds, Evergreen County Financial Crimes Unit. We received your report about the unauthorized access attempts on your properties. Do you have time to come down to the station this afternoon? 2 hours later, I sat across from Detective Reynolds in an interview room that defied television stereotypes. It was clean, well lit, and featured comfortable chairs around a small conference table. Reynolds himself was a surprise, a man in his early 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and thoughtful eyes that contrasted with his imposing physical presence. Your case has some unusual elements, he began, reviewing my file. Most financial fraud against property owners comes from outside scammers or identity thieves. You've indicated you believe this is coming from within your family structure? I explained my suspicions about Eleanor, detailing the timeline of events from the first noticed discrepancies to the most recent attempted equity withdrawal. Reynolds took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. The challenge here, he explained after I'd finished, is establishing criminal intent rather than misunderstanding. Your mother-in-law could claim she believed she had implicit permission to explore these financial options on your behalf, especially given the family connection. She forged my signature on multiple documents, I pointed out. That indicates knowledge that she didn't have permission. True, but defense attorneys love to muddy these waters in family situations. She thought she had authorization. It was a miscommunication between family members. She was trying to help. Reynolds leaned forward. We need irrefutable proof that she knew she was acting without authorization and deliberately attempted to circumvent legal protections. What would constitute such proof? I asked. Communications explicitly acknowledging the deception, bank records showing where the diverted funds were sent, documented attempts to hide her actions. He tapped his pen against his notepad. The new title restrictions your attorney filed are actually helpful in this regard. If she attempts to circumvent those after being made aware of them, that demonstrates clear intent. So we wait for her to try again? Reynolds nodded. Sometimes. The most effective strategy is patience. Continue gathering evidence, document everything, and let us know immediately if new attempts occur. In the meantime, we'll begin investigating the financial trails from the funds already diverted. As I left the police station, the sun was setting over Lakeside City, casting long shadows across the municipal complex. I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Jack and 1 from Eleanor herself. Before I could decide which to return first, a text message appeared from Sophia. Family dinner tonight at 7. Mother insists you come. Important wedding details to discuss. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient. Eleanor would have realized by now that her most recent attempt to access the Oakwood property equity had failed. Perhaps she was changing tactics, moving from behind-the-scenes manipulation to direct confrontation. Or perhaps this was another opportunity to manipulate Jack and create division between us. Either way, I couldn't refuse without appearing evasive. I texted Sophia back with a brief confirmation, then sent Jack a separate message. I'll be at dinner tonight. We should talk before. His reply came almost immediately. At the office until 6:30. Meet me there? Jack's urban planning consultancy occupied a renovated warehouse space near the River District. By the time I arrived at 6, most of his staff had left for the day. I found him alone in his office, standing by the windows overlooking the water, his expression troubled. "You've been busy today," he said without turning around. Mother mentioned the bank called her about some confusion with authorization forms. I remained by the door. That's an interesting way to describe forgery and fraud attempts. Jack finally faced me, his eyes tired. Melissa, this has gone far enough. Whatever misunderstanding exists between you and my mother, dragging in banks and lawyers is excessive. Misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. Jack, she forged my signature on financial documents. She attempted to redirect rental income from my properties. She tried to withdraw equity using falsified authorization forms. These aren't misunderstandings. They're crimes. She says she was exploring options to help with Sophia's wedding expenses, as you had offered. His voice held a note of doubt. I never offered my properties or equity for Sophia's wedding. Never. Not once. I stepped further into the office. Jack, I need you to think clearly. Has your mother ever shown this level of creative interpretation before? He ran a hand through his hair. She's always been strong-willed, determined to maintain certain appearances. When Dad's business struggled years ago, she kept up all the social obligations, the country club membership, the charity donations, even though we could barely afford it. And how did she manage that? I pressed gently. Jack's expression shifted as realization dawned. She took out a second mortgage without telling Dad, said it was temporary, just until things improved. He looked at me with new understanding. She did the same thing when Sophia started at Westfield Academy. The tuition was beyond our budget, but Mother insisted she attend because the Chen family children went there. This isn't new behavior, I concluded softly. It's an established pattern. Jack sank into his chair. But stealing from you? That's different. That's criminal, I supplied. And it needs to stop before it escalates further. What are you planning to do? I considered my next words carefully. I've already taken steps to protect my properties with additional legal restrictions. Any further attempts to transfer ownership or access equity will trigger automatic investigations. I paused. Jack, I need to know where you stand in this. Are we facing this together, or are you still straddling the fence? His expression hardened. She's my mother, Melissa. Despite her flaws, Despite whatever she's done, I can't simply turn my back on her. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to acknowledge the truth and help ensure she faces appropriate consequences, which might include getting help for whatever is driving this behavior. Jack was silent for a long moment. Let's get through tonight's dinner. See what she has to say. Then we'll decide next steps together. It wasn't the unequivocal support I'd hoped for, but it was progress. We drove separately to Maple Grove, the Walsh family estate that had intimidated me from my first visit. The sprawling Georgian colonial set on 5 manicured acres represented old wealth and established position. Everything Eleanor valued and everything I had worked to achieve on my own terms. Dinner was already underway when we arrived. Howard greeted us warmly but distractedly, while Sophia immediately launched into wedding details, seemingly oblivious to the tension. Eleanor presided. At the head of the table, perfectly composed in a cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my first month's rent after college. "Melissa, darling, I was beginning to worry," she said with practiced concern. "We've already discussed the floral arrangements. The Chens have particular cultural preferences we must accommodate. I'm sure whatever you've decided will be lovely," I replied neutrally, accepting the glass of wine Howard offered. "Actually," Eleanor continued smoothly, "the florist needs a deposit by Friday. $48,000 for the initial arrangements. I told them you'd handle it directly." The table fell silent. Even Sophia stopped mid-sentence about table linens. "That's interesting," I said, setting down my wine glass. "Considering I never agreed to pay for the flowers." Eleanor's smile remained fixed. "Don't be modest, dear. You specifically mentioned wanting to contribute something meaningful to Sophia's special day. What could be more meaningful than flowers? They'll be in all the photographs." Jack shifted beside me. "Mother, when exactly did Melissa offer to pay for the flowers?" "At Easter. Brunch, of course. We were discussing wedding plans on the terrace." Eleanor turned to Howard. "You remember, dear. Melissa was so generous, insisting she wanted to help." Howard looked confused. "I don't recall that conversation, Eleanor." "You were refilling drinks at the time," she said dismissively. "Nevertheless, the matter is settled. The florist is expecting Melissa's call tomorrow." She turned to Sophia, effectively ending the discussion. "Now, about the ice sculptures." I caught Jack's eye, seeing the doubt there. This was Eleanor's approach. Make declarations with such confidence that questioning them seemed awkward or impolite. Create social situations where challenging her assertions would disrupt family harmony. "Actually," I interrupted, "the matter isn't settled. I never agreed to pay for flowers at Easter or any other time." I turned to Sophia directly. "I'm happy to contribute to your wedding, but I haven't committed to any specific vendors or amounts." Eleanor's expression hardened momentarily before she recovered. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Nevertheless, the arrangements have been made. The Chens expect certain standards, and we can't possibly disappoint them at this stage. "I'm sure the Chens care more about their son's happiness than floral expenditures," I replied. Sophia looked uncomfortable. "The flowers aren't that important to me, honestly. Nathan and I would be happy with something simpler." "Nonsense," Eleanor snapped. "This wedding reflects on our entire family. Everything must be perfect." Howard cleared his throat. "Eleanor, if Melissa didn't agree to cover the flowers, we can't expect her to. We'll manage the expense ourselves." Eleanor's face flushed slightly. "Our accounts are temporarily illiquid, Howard, as you well know. The market downturn has affected our usual resources." "Then perhaps we should reconsider some of these expenses," he suggested mildly. "Impossible at this stage," Eleanor insisted. "Deposits have been placed, commitments made. Our reputation is at stake." I watched this exchange with growing understanding. Eleanor's desperate attempts to access my property equity suddenly made more sense. The Walsh family wealth, while substantial on paper, was apparently not liquid enough for the extravagant wedding Eleanor had planned. Rather than scale back or admit financial constraints, she had turned to my assets as a solution. "What other vendors have been told I'm covering their costs?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. Eleanor's hesitation told me everything. Just a few small details: the custom champagne, the ice sculptures, the string quartet for the rehearsal dinner. "And how much do these small details amount to?" I pressed. More silence. "Eleanor," Jack prompted, his voice uncharacteristically firm. "How much have you committed in Melissa's name?" She straightened her shoulders. "Approximately 190,000. A small fraction of what those properties of yours generate annually, Melissa. You'd hardly notice the expenditure." The audacity was breathtaking. "You committed nearly $200,000 in my name without my knowledge or consent? For family," Eleanor emphasized. "For Sophia's perfect day. For maintaining our position in society. The Chens—" "I don't care about the Chens," I interrupted. "I care about the fact that you've been making financial commitments using my name and attempting to access my property equity through fraudulent means. Do you realize that's criminal behavior, Eleanor?" Howard looked alarmed. "What do you mean? Fraudulent means?" "Mother's been trying to access Melissa's property equity," Jack explained, his expression grave. "Forging signatures, redirecting rental income, making unauthorized withdrawal attempts." Howard turned to Eleanor, shock evident on his face. "Is this true?" "Don't be dramatic, Howard," she dismissed. "I was simply exploring options to ensure our daughter's wedding meets appropriate standards. Melissa's properties are underutilized assets. As family, we should be able to leverage all available resources." "Those properties are not family assets," I stated firmly. "They're my separate property, built through my own efforts before and during my marriage to Jack." "Which makes your selfishness all the more apparent," Eleanor shot back, her composure finally cracking. "Family supports family, Melissa. Your insistence on maintaining separate assets speaks volumes about your commitment to this marriage, to this family." Jack tensed beside me. "That's unfair, Mother. Melissa's independent investments have never affected her commitment to our marriage or this family. Isn't it convenient," Eleanor continued as if Jack hadn't spoken, "that you insisted on keeping those properties in your name only? Almost as if you were planning an exit strategy from the beginning." "Eleanor," Howard admonished, but she was fully unleashed now. 3 properties generating substantial income, and you can't spare a fraction for your sister-in-law's wedding? What kind of family member does that make you? If Jack had married someone from our social circle, someone who understood family, obligations, and appearances, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The room fell silent. Sophia looked mortified, Howard uncomfortable, Jack stunned by his mother's venom. I maintained my composure, recognizing this outburst for what it was, a desperate attempt to shift blame and create division. "I understand family obligations quite well," I replied evenly. "They include honesty, respect for boundaries, and not committing felonies against your daughter-in-law." "Felonies?" Eleanor scoffed. Such dramatic language. "I was managing a temporary financial situation with resources that were available. The properties would never have left family control." "They were never under family control to begin with," I corrected. "And your attempts to change that have been documented by the bank, the title company, and now the police." "The police?" Howard's voice cracked. "Eleanor, what have you done?" Eleanor's confidence faltered for the first time. "Nothing that can't be rectified. A few signatures, some redirected funds, easily explained as administrative errors." "Fraud is not an administrative error," I stated. "Neither is forgery or theft." "You wouldn't dare pursue this," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Not if you value your marriage. Not if you care about this family's standing in the community." I felt Jack stiffen beside me, but kept my focus on Eleanor. I've already implemented additional legal protections on all my properties. Any further attempts to access or transfer ownership will trigger automatic criminal investigations. The choice is yours, Eleanor. Stop now or face the consequences. You ungrateful social climbing. Enough! Jack's voice cut through his mother's tirade. This stops now, Mother. What you've done is wrong. Legally and morally wrong. Eleanor turned to him, shock evident on her face. In all the years I'd known the Walsh family, I'd never heard Jack directly contradict his mother. Her surprise quickly morphed to calculation. Jackson, surely you understand the pressures of maintaining our family's position. The Chens expect a certain standard. Your sister deserves a wedding befitting her status. These properties, these investments Melissa clings to, they should benefit your family, your sister. They're Melissa's properties, Jack stated firmly. Her work, her investments, her decision how to use them. Eleanor's expression hardened. I see she's turned you against your own family. How disappointing. You did that yourself, Jack replied, when you decided theft and forgery were acceptable ways to fund a wedding. Sophia, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. Mother, I don't want a wedding paid for with stolen money. Nathan and I would be happy with something simpler, something we can actually afford. Afford? Eleanor's voice dripped with disdain. The Walshes don't compromise based on what we can afford. We maintain standards. We preserve appearances. Your father understands this, even if the rest of you have lost sight of our family's position. All eyes turned to Howard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. He cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Actually, Eleanor, I've been meaning to discuss our financial situation with you. He adjusted his glasses nervously. The market downturn has affected our investments more significantly than I've admitted. The trust fund distributions have been reduced by 40% this quarter. We simply cannot afford the wedding you've been planning, regardless of Melissa's properties. Eleanor stared at her husband as if he'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. That's not possible, our financial advisor assured me. I changed advisors 6 months ago, Howard interrupted gently. The previous one was too optimistic, taking risks I wasn't comfortable with. The new projections are more conservative, more realistic. And you didn't think to inform me? Eleanor's voice rose dangerously. I tried, several times. You dismissed my concerns as unnecessary worry. Howard looked genuinely apologetic. I should have been more insistent, more transparent. Perhaps then, you wouldn't have felt driven to. He trailed off, unable to directly name his wife's criminal actions. Eleanor's composure crumbled visibly. She looked around the table, perhaps seeing for the first time how isolated her position had become. This is temporary, she insisted. The market will recover. Our investments will rebound. The wedding must proceed as planned. We'll have the wedding we can afford, Howard stated firmly. Without theft, without forgery, without ruining family relationships. Sophia reached across the table to take her mother's hand. I don't need ice sculptures or custom champagne. Mother, I just want to marry Nathan with my family present and supportive. Eleanor withdrew her hand sharply. You don't understand what's at stake. The Chens love Nathan and want him to be happy, Sophia interrupted. Mrs. Chen told me herself that she thinks American weddings are unnecessarily extravagant. This final contradiction seemed to break something in Eleanor. She rose from the table, napkin clutched in her trembling hand. I see I'm outnumbered. If you all wish to diminish this family's standing, to humiliate me before our social circle, I cannot stop you. She turned to me, eyes burning with resentment. Remember this moment, Melissa, when your precious properties meant more to you than family loyalty. With a dramatic flourish, Eleanor left the dining room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble foyer before the front door slammed. The silence that followed was deafening. Howard stared at his wine glass, Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin, and Jack sat motionless beside me, his breathing carefully controlled the way it always was when he processed difficult emotions. "I should go after her," Howard finally said, half rising from his chair. "Give her time," I suggested gently. "She's just had several significant revelations at once." Howard nodded gratefully and sank back into his seat. "I should have been more forthcoming about our financial situation," he admitted. "Eleanor has always handled our social obligations while I focused on investments. Perhaps if I'd been clearer about our limitations." "This isn't your fault, Dad," Jack said firmly. "Mother made choices, illegal choices, regardless of the circumstances." Sophia looked up, her makeup slightly smudged. "I never wanted this elaborate wedding. Nathan and I would have been happy with something intimate, but Mother insisted that anything less would embarrass the family." She turned to me with reddened eyes. "I'm so sorry, Melissa. I had no idea she was trying to use your properties." "I know," I assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "This isn't about your wedding, Sophia. It's about patterns of behavior that have gone unchecked for too long." Howard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "What happens now, with the legal situation?" "That depends largely on Eleanor," I replied carefully. "I've filed reports with the bank and police documenting the unauthorized attempts. The new protective restrictions on my properties will prevent further tampering. If she stops now, we might be able to handle this privately, as a family matter." "And if she doesn't stop?" Howard's voice was barely audible. Jack answered for me. "Then the criminal justice system takes over, Dad. Fraud and forgery are serious offenses." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as we all contemplated this possibility. The Walsh family had always handled their affairs privately, maintaining a flawless public image regardless of private turmoil. The prospect of public legal proceedings, possibly even criminal charges against Eleanor, would shatter that carefully maintained facade. "I should check on Mother," Sophia finally said, standing up. "Whatever she's done, she's still family." After she left, Howard turned to me with tired eyes. "I've enabled her, haven't I? All these years, looking the other way when her social ambitions stretched our budget, ignoring the warning signs." "You trusted your wife," I said kindly. "There's no shame in that." "Perhaps not," he agreed. "But there is responsibility in continuing to ignore problems once they're evident." He straightened his shoulders slightly. "I'll speak with Eleanor tonight. Make it clear that any further attempts to access your properties will have my explicit disapproval." He offered a small, sad smile. "For whatever that's worth." After awkward goodbyes, Jack and I drove home in separate cars, the silence between us extending even into the digital space. Back at Pine Ridge, I found Jack on our back deck, staring out at the illuminated pool his mother had insisted we install, despite my practical objections about maintenance costs and infrequent use. "I've never contradicted her like that before," he said without turning around. "Not about anything significant." I stood beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "It was overdue." "Probably." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite the tension between us. Growing up, Mother's word was law. Her standards, her expectations shaped everything. When I brought home an A-, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. When I won silver in debate competition, she focused on who won gold. "That explains a lot about your perfectionist tendencies," I observed. A faint smile crossed his face. "You're the only person who ever made me feel like good enough was actually good enough." He finally turned to me. "I should have believed you immediately about her." "I'm sorry I didn't." The apology loosened something tight in my chest. "You were caught between your wife and your mother. That's an impossible position." "Not impossible," he corrected. "Just difficult. And I made the wrong choice initially." He reached for my hand tentatively. Partners should stand together. I should have stood with you from the beginning. I accepted his hand, the familiar warmth a relief after days of distance. Where do we go from here? Forward, Jack said firmly. Together. Whatever Mother has done, whatever consequences she faces, we face them as a unified front. He paused, his expression troubled. Though I admit, I'm concerned about what she might do next. Mother doesn't handle defeat gracefully. Jack's concern proved prophetic. The following morning, I received an email from Carol Hudson, copying several prominent members of the Lakeside social circle. The message was brief but devastating. Ladies, I regret to inform you that we must find a new venue for the Children's Hospital benefit. Melissa Anderson has withdrawn her offer to host at her Riverside property, despite previous commitments. With the event just 6 weeks away, we're now scrambling for alternatives. Any suggestions welcome. Carol. I read the email twice, feeling the calculated damage to my reputation. I had never offered the Riverside property for any hospital benefit. This was Eleanor's first countermove, attacking my standing in the community she valued so highly. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang with Thomas Franklin's number. "Have you seen the listing?" he asked without preamble. "What listing?" "Your Cedar Heights duplex. It went on the market this morning. Full listing, professional. Photos, virtual tour, the works." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's impossible. I never authorized a sale." "I know that," Thomas replied patiently. "But someone did. The listing agent is Vanessa Grant. Eleanor's bridge partner," I realized, aloud. "How is this possible? The title restrictions should prevent any sale attempt." "Technically, the property isn't being transferred yet, just listed. The restrictions would kick in once a sale was attempted. This is operating in a gray area." He paused. "There's more. The listing mentions owner relocating due to financial hardship. It's priced significantly below market value." The implications hit me immediately. Eleanor wasn't just attempting to sell my property without authorization. She was deliberately tanking its perceived value and suggesting I was in financial trouble. The damage to both my property's value and my professional reputation could be substantial. "I need this listing removed immediately," I stated, already reaching for my laptop. "Already working on it," Thomas assured me. "I've contacted the listing agency and the real estate commission, but damage control should happen quickly. Word spreads fast in this market." After ending the call with Thomas, I immediately contacted Diane, who promised to send cease and desist letters to the listing agency and prepare for possible injunctive action. Next, I called Detective Reynolds to update him on this latest development. "This actually helps your case," he noted after I explained the situation. "It establishes a clear pattern of intentional actions against your property interests, not just isolated incidents that could be explained away as misunderstandings." "Small comfort when my property value and reputation are being damaged in real time," I replied tersely. "Understood. We'll expedite the financial investigation based on this new information. In the meantime, document everything. Every email, every conversation, every financial impact." By midday, I'd composed a carefully worded reply to Carol. Hudson's email, copying the same social circle members. "Carol, I'm confused by your email as I never offered my Riverside property for the Children's Hospital benefit. While I fully support the cause and have contributed financially each year, no such venue offer was ever made. I'm happy to discuss actual ways I can contribute to this important event. Melissa." Jack called from his office shortly after. "Mother's escalating," he said, his voice tight. "I just received calls from 3 business associates asking if the rumors about our financial troubles are true." "What rumors specifically?" "That we're liquidating assets to cover bad investments, that my consulting firm is struggling, that we might be leaving Lakeside City altogether." His frustration was palpable. She's using her social network to spread damaging misinformation about both of us. We need to address this directly, I decided. Separate fact from fiction before these rumors affect your business. I've already scheduled calls with my key clients to reassure them, Jack confirmed. But Mother's network is extensive. There's no way to reach everyone who might hear these rumors. Then we don't play defense, I determined. We go on offense. That evening, Jack and I crafted a calculated response. Rather than chasing down individual rumors, we would create our own narrative. I contacted Thomas Franklin and instructed him to arrange an interview with the Lakeside Business Journal, a respected publication that covered local real estate and business news. The topic: my expansion plans for the Riverside property. We're announcing a major renovation and improvement project, I explained to Thomas. Substantial investment, creating local jobs, enhancing property values in the area. Frame it as a vote of confidence in the Lakeside market. Countering the financial hardship narrative, Thomas observed approvingly. Smart move. Next, Jack and I drafted a formal announcement for his consulting firm highlighting 3 new major contracts they'd recently secured. The timing had been planned for later in the quarter, but accelerating the announcement would effectively neutralize any rumors about business troubles. While we worked, my phone continuously buzzed with notifications. Eleanor's campaign was expanding. Friends called with concerns, professional contacts sent awkward inquiries about my financial stability, and the neighborhood message board speculated about why the Andersons might be forced to sell so suddenly. She's been planning this, Jack observed grimly. These aren't spontaneous reactions to last night's confrontation. She's had this campaign ready to launch if her initial plans failed, which suggests she might have further contingencies we haven't seen yet, I concluded, the realization chilling. This isn't just emotional retaliation, it's strategic. If confirming my suspicions, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. The message contained no text, only an attachment, a draft legal complaint naming me as defendant in a civil suit, alleging financial malfeasance and elder exploitation against Howard Walsh. She wouldn't, Jack breathed, reading over my shoulder. This is just a draft, I noted, examining the document carefully. Not filed with any court yet. It's a threat, showing what she's prepared to do next. The allegations were absurd, but crafted with just enough plausibility to cause significant damage. Claims that I had manipulated Howard into making unauthorized investments, that I had exploited his declining cognitive capacity to secure financial advantages, that my real estate success had come through privileged information obtained from the Walsh family connections. My father doesn't have cognitive issues, Jack stated flatly, and he's hardly made any investments in your properties. Facts don't matter for the initial damage, I replied, professional instincts kicking in. Just the filing of such a lawsuit would generate headlines, raise questions about my business practices, potentially scare off investors or lenders. I closed the document, my resolve hardening. This crosses a line, Jack. She's threatening to publicly accuse your father of mental decline just to harm my reputation. Jack's expression darkened. We need to speak with Dad. Now. Howard Walsh received us in his home study, a wood-paneled sanctuary filled with leather-bound books and hunting memorabilia. Eleanor was resting, according to the housekeeper, though her car was conspicuously absent from the circular driveway. She's been gone since morning, Howard confirmed after Jack asked directly. Didn't say where she was going, just that she had matters to attend to. He looked exhausted, the usual carefully maintained appearance of the Walsh patriarch notably diminished. His monogrammed shirt was slightly rumpled, his silver hair uncombed. Jack showed him the draft complaint. Howard read it slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a deep, somber understanding. She would destroy my dignity to punish you, he said finally, setting the document aside with trembling hands. Claim I'm mentally incompetent, unable to manage my own affairs. After 42 years of marriage. We won't let this happen, Dad, Jack assured him. But we need to act quickly. Howard nodded, squaring his shoulders with visible effort. What do you need from me? For the next hour, we outlined a strategy. Howard would immediately request full access to all family financial records, accounts Eleanor had exclusively managed for decades. He would contact the family attorney to document his mental competency and revoke any powers of attorney Eleanor held. Most importantly, he would prepare a formal statement refuting any claims of exploitation or undue influence regarding my business dealings. There's something else you should know, Howard said as we prepared to leave. Something I discovered this morning while reviewing accounts. He handed Jack a file folder containing bank statements. Eleanor has been transferring funds from our joint accounts to a separate account in Sophia's name. Nearly $600,000 over the past 4 months. Jack examined the statements. These withdrawals align perfectly with her attempts to access Melissa's properties. I believe she was trying to fund the wedding from multiple sources, Howard explained. When the family accounts couldn't cover her plans, she turned to Melissa's properties. When that failed, she began liquidating investments we'd agreed would remain untouched until retirement. Does Sophia know about this account? I asked. Howard shook his head. I contacted her this morning. She had no idea. Eleanor set it up using Sophia's personal information but maintained sole access. This revelation added another disturbing dimension to Eleanor's actions. She hadn't just attempted to defraud me. She'd been systematically moving family funds, without Howard's knowledge, using their daughter's identity to create hidden accounts. Dad, you need to freeze these accounts immediately, Jack urged, and consider filing a police report. This goes beyond wedding expenses. This is identity fraud against Sophia. Howard looked pained. Filing charges against my wife? Against your mother? Is that really necessary? She was preparing to publicly declare you mentally incompetent, Jack reminded him gently. And she committed identity fraud using your daughter's information. This isn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it's a pattern of criminal behavior. Before Howard could respond, his phone rang. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway simultaneously, her expression anxious. Mr. Walsh, there are police officers at the front door. They're asking to speak with you and Mrs. Walsh. Howard answered his still ringing phone, listening intently before thanking the caller and hanging up. That was my bank's fraud department, he explained, his voice strained. Someone attempted to liquidate our entire portfolio this morning. The transaction was flagged because it required dual authorization, and my signature was... He paused, seemingly unable to complete the sentence. Forged, Jack finished for him. Just like she did with Melissa's documents. Howard nodded, the last of his resistance crumbling. I'll speak with the police. This can't continue. The officers were professional and discreet, taking Howard's statement in the privacy of his study. The attempted liquidation of the Walsh family investments had triggered automatic fraud alerts at multiple financial institutions, prompting the police response. Combined with the reports I'd already filed, a disturbing pattern of escalating financial crimes was emerging. Do you know your wife's current whereabouts, Mr. Walsh? The lead officer asked. No, Howard admitted. She left this morning without specifying her destination. We'll need to locate her for questioning, the officer explained. Given the scale of the attempted financial transactions, this case may involve our Financial Crimes Division and possibly federal authorities if funds cross state lines. After the police left, Howard seemed to age years in minutes, slumping in his leather chair. 42 years, he repeated quietly. I never imagined it would end with police in my study, searching for my wife. Jack placed a supportive hand on his father's shoulder. This isn't the end, Dad. It's a necessary intervention before things get worse. There are resources that can help, I added carefully. Financial counseling, therapy, legal mediation. This doesn't have to become a public spectacle if Eleanor cooperates. Howard looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but resolute. I've spent my entire married life accommodating Eleanor's concerns about appearances, about social standing, about what others think. Perhaps if I'd been more willing to confront reality sooner, we wouldn't be here now. He straightened in his chair. No, more enabling. No more looking the other way. Whatever happens next, we face it honestly. As if summoned by this declaration, Howard's phone rang again. He answered, listening briefly before his expression shifted to alarm. "It's Sophia," he said, covering the receiver. Eleanor showed. "Up at her apartment an hour ago, extremely agitated. She's demanding Sophia sign some documents immediately, claiming it's for the family's protection." Jack took the phone. "Sophia?" "It's Jack. Don't sign anything. Nothing at all. We're on our way." He paused, listening. "Is Nathan with you?" "Good. Don't let Mother leave. Tell her Dad and I are coming to help sort things out." 20 minutes later, we arrived at Sophia and Nathan's downtown apartment building. The doorman recognized Jack immediately, allowing us up without calling ahead. In the elevator, Jack turned to his father. "Let me take the lead," he suggested. "Mother's already agitated, and seeing you might escalate things given the police visit." Howard nodded agreement, his expression grim. "I just want to make sure Sophia's all right." The scene in the apartment was tense. Eleanor sat rigidly on the edge of a modern sectional sofa, a portfolio of documents clutched in her manicured hands. Sophia stood near the kitchen island, arms crossed defensively, while Nathan hovered protectively nearby. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken conflict. "Jackson," Eleanor acknowledged coolly as we entered. "How convenient that you've arrived. Perhaps you can explain to your sister the importance of family loyalty in difficult times." "What documents are you asking Sophia to sign?" Jack asked directly, ignoring the attempted manipulation. Eleanor's smile tightened. "Just some necessary financial arrangements in light of recent misunderstandings. Nothing that concerns you." "If it involves my sister signing legal documents, it absolutely concerns me," Jack countered. He turned to Sophia. "Has she explained exactly what these papers are?" Sophia shook her head. "Just that Dad is being manipulated and the family assets need protection. She wanted me to sign as a co-trustee on some new accounts." Her voice dropped. "She said you and Melissa were trying to take control of the family money." "That's categorically false," Howard stated, stepping forward. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Eleanor's composure slipped momentarily at the sight of her husband. "Howard, what are you doing here? You should be resting." "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," he replied firmly. "Despite what you're apparently telling our daughter." Eleanor's gaze darted between Howard and the documents in her lap, calculation evident in her expression. "This is a family matter, Howard. I'm simply ensuring our assets are properly protected during this temporary difficulty. By having our daughter sign documents she doesn't understand, by attempting to liquidate our entire portfolio without my knowledge." Howard's voice remained measured but carried an unusual authority. "The police are looking for you, Eleanor. There are serious questions about multiple financial irregularities." "Police?" Sophia gasped. "Mom, what's going on?" "Nothing that can't be resolved with proper family cooperation," Eleanor insisted, though her confident facade was visibly cracking. "These signatures will clear everything up, protect our interests." "May I see those documents?" I requested, extending my hand. Eleanor clutched the portfolio tighter. "This doesn't concern you, Melissa. This is Walsh family business." "Sophia is about to sign them, and she's unclear what they contain," I pointed out reasonably. "As a financial professional, perhaps I can explain the implications in neutral terms." "That's a good idea," Nathan spoke up for the first time. "I'd feel more comfortable if we understood exactly what these papers mean before Sophia signs anything." Eleanor's eyes narrowed at this betrayal from an unexpected quarter. After a tense moment, she reluctantly handed me the portfolio, her movements stiff with suppressed anger. I reviewed the documents carefully, my concern growing with each page. These weren't simple trustee arrangements as Eleanor had implied. They were comprehensive financial transfers that would move all Walsh family assets into a new trust controlled solely by Eleanor and Sophia, explicitly excluding Howard and Jack as beneficiaries or decision-makers. More disturbingly, several pages referenced my properties specifically, with provisions authorizing the trust to recover misappropriated family assets through legal action against me. These documents would effectively disinherit Howard and Jack, I explained, looking directly at Sophia. And they authorize legal action against me based on false claims of misappropriation. Sophia's eyes widened. Mom, is this true? Eleanor stood abruptly. You're twisting the legal language, Melissa. These are standard protections for family assets. They're nothing of the sort, I contradicted calmly. And I suspect they were drafted without proper legal counsel. There are numerous provisions here that would never survive legal scrutiny. Who prepared these documents, Eleanor? Howard asked quietly. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. You drafted these yourself, Howard realized. Using what? Legal? Templates from the internet? Creating the impression they came from our family attorney? He shook his head sadly. This has gone far enough. You don't understand what's at stake, Eleanor insisted, her voice rising. Our position, our standing, everything we've built over decades. I am protecting this family's legacy while all of you seem determined to dismantle it. By committing fraud? Jack challenged. By forging signatures? By attempting to turn Sophia against her father and brother? That's not protection, Mother. That's destruction. Eleanor turned to Sophia, her last hope. Darling, you understand, don't you? The wedding, the expectations, maintaining our place in society. These things matter. They've always mattered to us. Sophia stepped forward, gently taking the documents from my hands. Without a word, she walked to the kitchen, picked up a pair of scissors from a drawer, and deliberately cut the papers in half. What matters, she said quietly, is honesty. Family based on truth, not appearances. She looked at her mother with sad determination. I don't want a wedding built on fraud and family conflict, Mom. I want us to get help and heal whatever's driving this behavior. Eleanor stared at the destroyed documents, something crumbling in her carefully maintained facade. For a moment, I glimpsed the frightened woman beneath the polished exterior, someone terrified of losing status, of public embarrassment, of failing to meet the impossible standards she'd set for herself and her family. It's over, Eleanor, Howard said gently. The police want to speak with you about the attempted liquidation of our accounts, about the forgeries, about the fraud. We can do this privately, with dignity, or it can become exactly the public spectacle you've always feared. The choice is yours. Eleanor stood motionless, her world visibly collapsing around her. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. What happens now? Howard stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. We go to the police station together. You answer their questions honestly. We engage legal counsel to address the attempted fraud. Eleanor's hand fluttered to her throat, her fingers nervously adjusting the strand of pearls she never appeared without. Surely there's another way, a private arrangement. The financial institutions have already filed reports, Jack explained. This isn't just a family matter anymore. I could speak with Judge Carlton, Eleanor suggested, desperation edging into her voice. His wife and I co-chair the Symphony Gala. He would understand the need for discretion in matters involving prominent families. I exchanged glances with Jack, both of us recognizing this suggestion for what it was, another attempt to leverage social connections to evade consequences. Attempting to influence a judge would only compound the legal issues, I pointed out carefully. The best approach now is transparency and cooperation. Eleanor's gaze hardened as she looked at me. You've never understood how our world works, have you? In certain circles, these matters are handled with appropriate sensitivity. A few calls to the right people, a discreet donation to the right causes, these problems disappear. That's exactly the thinking that led us here, Howard said sadly. The belief that rules don't apply if your social standing is high enough, that appearances matter more than integrity. Don't lecture me about integrity, Eleanor snapped. I've spent 40 years maintaining this family's position while you focused on spreadsheets and investment portfolios. Every invitation, every charity board position, every school admission and club membership, these things don't happen by accident. They require constant cultivation, constant vigilance. And they're worth committing crimes for? Jack asked quietly. Eleanor faltered, perhaps hearing how her justifications sounded to others for the first time. The room fell silent as she seemed to wrestle with competing impulses, defiance versus the dawning reality of her situation. I need to speak with my attorney, she finally said, reaching for her phone. Of course, Howard agreed, but I'm coming with you to the police station afterward. Eleanor's fingers paused over the screen. You're choosing their side? After everything I've done for this family? I'm choosing truth, Howard replied simply. Something I should have done years ago. The next few hours unfolded with a surreal efficiency. Eleanor's attorney, Patricia Reynolds, arrived within 30 minutes. A sleek, formidable woman who specialized in high-profile damage control. After a private consultation with Eleanor, she emerged with a strategy focused on cooperation and mitigation. Mrs. Walsh will voluntarily speak with investigators, she announced to the assembled family. We request that any interviews happen at my office rather than the police station to maintain appropriate discretion. Detective Reynolds agreed to this arrangement after a phone consultation, scheduling the interview for 9 the following morning. Eleanor would remain in Howard's custody until then, with her passport temporarily surrendered to her attorney as a show of good faith. As these arrangements were finalized, Sophia pulled me aside in the kitchen, her expression troubled. Is this really necessary? She asked quietly. Criminal charges against my mother? Couldn't we find another way to address what happened? I considered my response carefully. Your mother attempted multiple fraudulent financial transactions. She forged signatures, redirected funds, created false documents. It's not just about my properties anymore. She tried to liquidate your family's entire portfolio today. Sophia's eyes widened. The whole portfolio? But that's millions, I confirmed. This has escalated well beyond wedding expenses or family disagreements. These are serious financial crimes with real victims and consequences. I just keep thinking about how this will look when it becomes public, Sophia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The society pages, the gossip, everyone talking about our family falling apart right before my wedding. I recognized the echo of Eleanor's priorities and Sophia's concerns, the emphasis on appearances, on what others would think. The socialization ran deep. The truth is going to come out one way or another, I told her gently, either in a controlled way through proper legal channels or in a chaotic way if your mother continues these escalating behaviors. I suppose you're right, Sophia sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture reminiscent of her mother. Nathan and I have been talking about postponing the wedding anyway. Given everything that's happening, a big celebration seems inappropriate. That's a mature decision, I acknowledged, though I'm sorry it's necessary. Sophia offered a small, sad smile. Maybe we'll have the small, intimate ceremony I wanted all along. Just family who actually care about us, not my mother's social network. As arrangements were finalized for Eleanor's legal representation and police interview, Jack and I prepared to leave. Howard would return to Maple Grove with Eleanor, while Patricia Reynolds began building her defense strategy. The immediate crisis appeared contained, but the long-term ramifications were just beginning to unfold. "I should stay with Dad tonight," Jack told me as we approached our cars. "Make sure things remain stable between him and Mother." "Of course," I agreed. "I'll be fine at home. I have some damage control of my own to manage with the false property listing." Jack pulled me into a tight embrace, something desperate in his grip. "I'm so sorry," he whispered against my hair, "for doubting you, for not seeing what was happening sooner." "We're going to get through this," I assured him, returning the embrace. "One step at a time." As I drove home alone, the events of the day replayed in my mind. Eleanor's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, but I took no satisfaction in the collapse. The web of deception had ensnared her entire family, creating wounds that would take years to heal, if they ever did. Some fractures could be repaired with time and effort, but others permanently altered the landscape of relationships. Back at Pine Ridge, I found a courier envelope propped against our front door. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream stationery embossed with the Lakeside Country Club insignia. The handwritten note was brief. "The Walsh family has been members in good standing for 40 years. Such membership requires discretion in personal affairs. Perhaps a private resolution could be found for current misunderstandings before irreparable damage occurs to respected family names. Marguerite Caldwell, Membership Committee Chair." I stared at the note, understanding its subtext perfectly. Eleanor had activated her social network, applying pressure through the institutions and relationships she valued most. Marguerite Caldwell was sending a clear message: handle this quietly or face social consequences. The implied threat might have influenced Eleanor or Howard, but it held no power over me. I'd built my life and career outside the rarefied circles of old money and social registers. My reputation rested on financial acumen and business integrity, not dinner party invitations or committee appointments. I set the note aside and focused on more pressing matters. Thomas had successfully had the fraudulent property listing removed, but the damage control required additional steps. I spent 2 hours drafting emails to key business associates, confirming my continued ownership and investment in all properties. I arranged an interview with the Lakeside Business Journal for the following week to announce expansion plans for the Riverside property, a clear counter-narrative to rumors of financial hardship. Around midnight, Jack called to provide an update. "Mother is sedated," he reported, his voice weary. "Her doctor prescribed something to help her sleep. Dad is doing better than expected, almost relieved that everything is finally in the open." "How are you holding up?" I asked, hearing the exhaustion in his voice. "Processing," he admitted. "It's still hard to reconcile the mother I've known all my life with someone capable of these actions. The calculation, the deception, the willingness to harm her own family to maintain appearances. People are complex," I said gently. "She can be both the mother who loved you and the woman who made these terrible choices." "I suppose." Jack sighed heavily. "Patricia thinks she can negotiate a settlement that avoids criminal charges. Restitution, community service, mandatory counseling. Given Mother's age and lack of prior criminal history, the prosecutor might agree." "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. "Conflicted," he admitted. "Part of me wants her to face real consequences for what she did. But another part, she's still my mother, Melissa. The idea of her in a courtroom, possibly facing jail time, I don't know if I can bear it. Whatever happens, we'll face it together," I promised. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough." Sleep proved elusive that night, my mind refusing to quiet despite physical exhaustion. At dawn, I gave up trying and headed to my home office, focusing on work to distract from the impending legal proceedings. Property reports needed reviewing, tenant issues required attention, and routine maintenance decisions couldn't wait for personal crises to resolve. At 8:30, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Anderson?" This is Patricia Reynolds, Eleanor Walsh's attorney. We have a situation. My stomach tightened. What's happened? Eleanor is missing, Patricia stated, her professional tone betraying no emotion. She left the house sometime during the night. Howard discovered her absence around 6 this morning. Missing, I repeated, trying to process the implications. Have you notified Detective Reynolds? Yes, he's been informed. Given the financial charges pending, this complicates matters significantly. Leaving before a scheduled police interview suggests flight. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? That's partly why I'm calling you, Patricia admitted. Howard and Jack are checking with family friends, but I understand you've been investigating Eleanor's financial activities. Might you have encountered any information suggesting where she could access funds or find shelter? I considered the question carefully. The account in Sophia's name that Howard discovered. Has anyone checked if there have been recent withdrawals? Good thinking. I'll have Howard look into that immediately. Patricia paused. There's another matter we need to discuss. Upon learning of Eleanor's disappearance, the district attorney's office has accelerated their review of the case. They're now considering charges of wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, and attempted grand larceny. Given her flight, they're likely to take a much harder stance in any potential plea negotiations. The severity of the situation was escalating by the hour. What had begun as concerning financial irregularities had cascaded into multiple serious felony charges with a fugitive suspect. I understand, I replied. Please keep me informed of any developments. I'll do the same if I think of potential locations. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Detective Reynolds to offer any assistance I could provide in locating Eleanor. He confirmed that law enforcement was treating her disappearance as deliberate flight to avoid prosecution and had initiated appropriate protocols. We're checking credit card activity, ATM withdrawals, transportation hubs, he explained. Given Mrs. Walsh's profile and resources, we're casting a wide net. Could she have left the country? I asked, thinking of Eleanor's frequent mentions of her beloved shopping trips to Paris and Milan. Her passport was surrendered to her attorney yesterday, Reynolds reminded me, though we're checking if she might have a second one under a maiden name or through dual citizenship. The possibility hadn't occurred to me. I don't know of any dual citizenship, but it's worth investigating. The detective thanked me for my cooperation and promised updates as the situation evolved. As I hung up, a text arrived from Jack. Mom's credit card was just used at Harrington's department store downtown. Dad and I are heading there now. Harrington's was Eleanor's favorite luxury retailer, a family-owned establishment that had served Lakeside City's elite for generations. The store's owner, Margaret Harrington, had been Eleanor's friend for decades, exactly the sort of connection Eleanor might leverage in a crisis. I hesitated, unsure whether to join Jack or stay back to avoid complicating an already volatile family situation. Before I could decide, another text arrived. Could use your clear thinking here. Can you meet us? 20 minutes later, I pulled into the private parking area behind Harrington's, reserved for their most valued customers. Jack and Howard waited near the service entrance, both looking haggard from stress and lack of sleep. Any sign of her? I asked, approaching them. Howard shook his head. Margaret confirms Eleanor was here about an hour ago. She purchased several items and asked to use the private fitting room to change. Did she say anything about where she was going? Nothing specific, Jack replied. Just that she needed appropriate attire for an important meeting. What did she buy? I asked, professional instincts activating. Margaret wouldn't say exactly, Howard admitted. Customer privacy, apparently. Even for a wife of 40 years. Detective Reynolds is on his way with a warrant, Jack added. But that will take time, and Mother could be anywhere by then. I considered the situation from Eleanor's perspective. If she were truly fleeing, what resources would she need? What preparations would she make? Her credit card usage was surprisingly careless for someone evading detection, unless it was intentional. Did Eleanor specifically ask Margaret to extend her customer privacy protections? I questioned. Howard frowned. I'm not sure. Margaret just said she couldn't divulge detailed purchase information. But Eleanor must have known you'd be notified of the credit card charge, I continued, thinking aloud. She could have paid cash if she wanted to hide her tracks completely. Jack's expression shifted as he followed my reasoning. You think she wanted us to know she was here? That this is some kind of misdirection? Possibly, I acknowledged. Or she's sending a message, making a point about loyalty and connections. Before we could discuss further, Detective Reynolds arrived with 2 uniformed officers and the promised warrant. Margaret Harrington met them at the service entrance, her aristocratic features arranged in disapproving lines. This is entirely unnecessary, she informed the detective coldly. Harrington's has served the finest families in Lakeside City for over a century with absolute discretion. A simple conversation would have sufficed. We appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Harrington, Reynolds replied diplomatically. However, this is now a criminal investigation involving a missing person who may be attempting to flee prosecution. Margaret's expression registered shock. Criminal investigation? Eleanor Walsh is a pillar of this community. There must be some misunderstanding. I'm afraid not, Howard said quietly. My wife is facing serious charges related to financial fraud and forgery. Her disappearance this morning complicates an already difficult situation. Margaret's demeanor softened slightly. Howard, I had no idea. Eleanor said nothing about legal troubles. She mentioned only that she needed appropriate attire for an important foundation meeting. Did she specify which foundation? I asked. Quickly. The Carlton Family Foundation, Margaret replied. Eleanor sits on their board. She mentioned a special session regarding grant distributions. Jack and Howard exchanged glances. There's no foundation meeting today, Howard stated. I would have received the notification as a donor. Detective Reynolds stepped forward. Ms. Harrington, we'll need access to your security footage and a list of exactly what Mrs. Walsh purchased today. While the detective handled the formal investigation, I pulled Jack aside. The Carlton family, aren't they connected to Judge Carlton? The one Eleanor mentioned yesterday? Jack nodded slowly, comprehension dawning. Judge Carlton's wife, Beatrice, runs their family foundation. Mother and Beatrice have served on multiple charity boards together for years. And didn't Eleanor specifically mention Judge Carlton when she was suggesting ways to make this situation disappear? I recalled. This can't be coincidence. You think she's gone to the Carltons for help, Jack realized. Or protection, I amended. A place to stay while she figures out her next move. Somewhere she believes the police might be reluctant to search due to the judge's position. Jack immediately texted his father this theory while I shared it with Detective Reynolds, who was reviewing security footage showing Eleanor exiting through Harrington's VIP entrance approximately 50 minutes earlier. The Carlton estate is in Lakewood Heights, Reynolds noted, already contacting his team. We'll need to proceed carefully given Judge Carlton's position, but if Mrs. Walsh is there, we'll need to speak with her. The detective departed with his officers while Jack, Howard, and I regrouped in the parking lot. Howard looked physically ill, the strain of the situation etched deeply in his face. I never imagined our lives would come to this, he said quietly. Police searches, fraud investigations, Eleanor fleeing rather than facing what she's done. She's scared, Jack observed, and she's falling back on what she knows best, leveraging social connections to protect herself. Those connections won't shield her from federal wire fraud charges, I pointed out. They might delay the inevitable, but they can't make these problems disappear. Howard nodded grimly. Eleanor has always believed the rules are different for people in our position. That with the right connections, the right approach, any situation can be managed. He sighed heavily. I enabled that belief by never challenging it, by allowing her to handle our social affairs while I focused on business. Perhaps if I'd been more engaged, more aware— "This isn't your fault, Dad," Jack assured him, placing a supportive hand on his father's shoulder. "Mother made her own choices." My phone rang. Detective Reynolds updating us on the situation. "We've confirmed Mrs. Walsh is at the Carlton estate," he reported. "Judge Carlton has been informed of the situation and is cooperating fully with our investigation. However, there's a complication." "What kind of complication?" I asked. "Mrs. Walsh is claiming she came to the Carlton seeking protection from emotional and financial abuse. She's filed an emergency request for a protective order against both Howard Walsh and you, Ms. Anderson." The audacity of the counter-move was breathtaking. Eleanor was attempting to reframe the entire situation, casting herself as the victim rather than the perpetrator. "That's absurd," Howard sputtered. "I've never abused Eleanor in any way." "Unfortunately, the allegation requires investigation," Reynolds explained. "Judge Carlton has properly recused himself due to the personal connection, but the filing creates procedural delays we need to navigate." "She's buying time," I realized, "creating legal complications to slow down the fraud investigation." "Precisely," Reynolds confirmed. "My team is working with the district attorney's office to address these tactics, but it might take several hours to cut through the procedural issues. In the meantime, I'd advise all of you to contact your attorneys and prepare for a potentially contentious legal battle." After ending the call, I shared the update with Jack and Howard, both of whom appeared stunned by this latest development. "She's accusing us of abuse?" Howard repeated, disbelief evident in his voice. "After everything she's done?" "It's a tactical move," I explained. "She's trying to muddy the waters, create confusion about who's the victim here. Classic Darvo. Deny. Attack, reverse victim and offender." Jack ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "So what now? We just wait while Mother spins this twisted narrative about being abused?" "We fight back with facts," I stated firmly. "The bank records, the forged documents, the fraudulent property listing, these provide objective evidence of what actually happened. Eleanor can make all the counter-allegations she wants, but documentation doesn't lie." Howard straightened his shoulders, something of his former dignified presence returning. "I've spent too many years accommodating Eleanor's version of reality. No more. I'll testify to whatever is necessary to establish the truth." We decided to regroup at Howard's law firm's offices, where his longtime attorney, Martin Graves, could coordinate with my attorney Diane and Jack's corporate counsel. The legal complexities required a unified strategy, particularly with Eleanor now attempting to reframe herself as a victim. The offices of Graves, Hoffman, and Pierce occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise with commanding views of Lakeside City. Martin Graves himself, a distinguished man in his 60s with a reputation for meticulous preparation, greeted us in the conference room where Diane Cooper had already arrived. "This situation has evolved rather dramatically," Martin observed after introductions were completed. "Eleanor's protective order strategy is concerning but manageable. We've already filed counter-documentation with the court showing the timeline of financial irregularities preceding any claims of abuse." "How quickly can we get this protective order dismissed?" Howard asked. "Realistically, 2 to 3 days," Martin replied. "The court takes abuse allegations seriously, as they should, but in this case, the evidence strongly suggests this is a tactical filing without merit." Diane opened her laptop, displaying a document on the conference room's large screen. "I've prepared a comprehensive timeline of Eleanor's actions regarding Melissa's properties. Bank records, forged authorizations, the fraudulent property listing. Everything documented with dates and supporting evidence." "Excellent," Martin approved. "This helps establish that Eleanor's actions were premeditated and systematic, not reactions to any alleged abuse." "What about the attempted liquidation of the Walsh family portfolio?" I asked. That seems particularly damning given Eleanor's current claims of financial abuse. Absolutely, Martin agreed. Howard has already provided authorization for the financial institutions to share those records with investigators. The timing makes it clear this was part of Eleanor's plan before any protective order was considered. For the next hour, the legal team worked to consolidate evidence and develop a strategy for addressing Eleanor's counter-accusations while keeping the focus on her documented financial fraud. Jack remained unusually quiet throughout the meeting, his expression troubled as he listened to the clinical discussion of his mother's criminal actions. "Are you okay?" I asked during a brief break, finding him staring out the window at the city spread below. "Just thinking about Sophia," he replied. "Her wedding was supposed to be next month. Now her mother is facing criminal charges, her parents' marriage is imploding, and the family she thought she knew is unraveling in the most public way possible." "Have you spoken with her today?" Jack nodded. "Briefly. She and Nathan are drafting an announcement postponing the wedding indefinitely. He hesitated. "She's devastated but handling it with remarkable grace. Said she'd rather have truth than illusions, no matter how painful." "She's stronger than Eleanor gives her credit for," I observed. "We all are," Jack said, turning to face me. "Including Mother, though she's channeling that strength in destructive ways right now." Our conversation was interrupted by Martin's assistant entering with an urgent message. "Detective Reynolds called. There's been another development with Mrs. Walsh." Martin took the message slip, reading it quickly before addressing the room. "Eleanor has now filed for emergency divorce proceedings against Howard, claiming emotional and financial coercion. She's requesting immediate division of assets and exclusive access to the Walsh family home." Howard sank into his chair, the color draining from his face. 42 years of marriage, and she files for divorce as a legal tactic. "It's consistent with her pattern," Diane noted, "creating complications to delay the fraud investigation and reposition herself as a victim rather than perpetrator." "Can she actually get emergency asset division?" Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. "Unlikely given the pending criminal investigation," Martin assured him. "The court will almost certainly freeze major assets until the fraud allegations are resolved. However, this does create additional procedural hurdles we'll need to address." Before further discussion could continue, my phone rang with a familiar number. Thomas Franklin, my real estate agent. "Melissa," he said without preamble. "Someone's at the Riverside property right now, removing items from the building. The property manager called me directly since he couldn't reach you." My pulse quickened. "What kind of items?" "Furniture, artwork, even fixtures according to the report. A moving truck with an Estate Liquidation Services logo. They claim to have proper authorization." "They absolutely do not," I stated firmly. "I'm calling the police immediately. Tell Victor to stall them however he can without putting himself at risk." I ended the call and quickly explained the situation to the room. "This has Eleanor's fingerprints all over it," I concluded. "She's escalating from paper fraud to actual physical theft now." "I'll contact Detective Reynolds," Martin offered, reaching for the phone. "I'm going there myself," I decided, gathering my things. "Those properties represent years of my work and investment. I won't let her strip them bare as some kind of vindictive gesture." "I'm coming with you," Jack stated, already standing. Howard rose as well. "As am I. This has gone far enough." 20 minutes later, we arrived at the Riverside Apartments, to find the situation already contained. 2 police cruisers blocked the moving truck from leaving, and officers were interviewing the movers, while Victor Martinez, my property manager, stood nearby looking both angry and relieved to see us. "Ms. Anderson," he greeted me, visibly agitated. "They showed up with what looked like legitimate authorization forms. I tried calling you immediately but couldn't get through." "You did exactly the right thing by contacting Thomas," I assured him. "What exactly did they take?" "Artwork from the main lobby, furniture from the model unit, and they were starting on light fixtures when I became suspicious and called Thomas. They claimed to be conducting an approved property refresh. On behalf of the owner, I approached the police officers, identifying myself as the property owner. The lead officer, Sergeant Ramirez, explained the situation from law enforcement's perspective. The movers appeared to be legitimate contractors who believed they had proper authorization, he stated. They were provided with documentation that, on its face, looks authentic. Letterhead, signatures, corporate seal. We're still determining who hired them and where the items were to be delivered. I can tell you exactly who hired them, I stated firmly. Eleanor Walsh, my mother-in-law who has been attempting to access my properties through fraudulent means for months. Sergeant Ramirez made a note. That aligns with information we're receiving from the moving company. They were contacted by a woman identifying herself as Eleanor Walsh, claiming to represent the property ownership group. She has no authority whatsoever regarding this property, I emphasized. The ownership documents are clear and unambiguous. I am the sole owner. We understand, Ms. Anderson. Detective Reynolds has already briefed our department about the ongoing fraud investigation involving Mrs. Walsh. We're treating this as part of that larger case. As the officers continued their work, I surveyed the damage to the property. The elegant lobby, designed to create a positive first impression for potential tenants, had been stripped of its artwork and several decorative pieces. The model, unit, used to showcase the apartments to prospective renters, was partially dismantled. The timing isn't coincidental, Jack observed, standing beside me in the emptied lobby. Mother knows these properties are important to you. This is retaliation for the fraud investigation. It's more than that, I realized, a cold certainty settling over me. It's a message. She's showing what she's capable of, escalating the conflict. This is Eleanor saying, if I'm going down, I'm taking what matters to you with me. Howard examined the forged authorization documents the police had recovered from the moving company. These are remarkably professional, he noted with reluctant admiration. Corporate letterhead, proper formatting, convincing signatures. Eleanor has clearly been planning this for some time. The question is, what else has she planned? I said, quietly. If she's willing to go this far, what other attacks should we be preparing for? Jack's phone rang, Sophia calling with yet another development. Mom just showed up at my apartment, she reported, her voice shaking slightly. She's acting strange, Melissa, talking about securing family heirlooms and protecting our legacy. She wants me to help her get into your house. Our house? Jack repeated, alarmed. Sophia, don't let her in. Don't give her any access. Call the police immediately. She's already gone, Sophia clarified. I refused to help, and she left looking, determined. I'm worried about what she might do next, Jack. A cold realization washed over me. The properties were just a distraction, I whispered, already moving toward the exit. She's going after our home next. Jack and I raced toward Pine Ridge, calling the police en route to report a potential break-in at our home. Howard followed in his own car while Thomas stayed behind to oversee the recovery of items taken from the Riverside property. The 15-minute drive felt interminable, each traffic light an eternity as we considered what Eleanor might be doing. What could she possibly want from our house? Jack wondered aloud, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's not about wanting something specific, I realized. It's about striking back, causing damage to what matters to us. She's lashing out because she's losing control of the narrative. As we turned onto our street, a sleek silver Mercedes was parked haphazardly in our driveway, Eleanor's car, recognizable by the personalized license plate bearing the Walsh family initials. The front door of our home stood partially open. Stay in the car, Jack instructed, slowing to a stop at the curb. We don't know what state she's in. We face this together, I countered, already opening my door. That's what we agreed. Jack nodded grimly, and we approached our home with caution. From inside came the sound of breaking glass followed by Eleanor's voice, pitched higher than normal. talking to herself in fragmented sentences. Always her. Never good enough. Show them what happens. We entered to find devastation. The living room had been systematically dismantled. Family. Photos smashed, cushions slashed, decorative items shattered on the hardwood floors. Eleanor stood in the center of the destruction, still impeccably dressed in a designer suit from her Harrington's shopping trip, her pearl necklace gleaming against the navy blue fabric. In her hand, she held a crystal vase, a wedding gift from Howard's parents, poised to join the wreckage around her. "Mother," Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the shock evident in his eyes. "Stop this." Eleanor spun toward us, her normally perfect hair disheveled, her makeup slightly smeared, small imperfections that spoke volumes about her mental state. "Well, the happy couple returns," she said, her voice brittle with forced lightness. "How convenient." "Eleanor, please put down the vase," I requested calmly. "The police are on their way. Let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Like how you've rationally pursued charges against me? Rationally turned my husband and children against me? Rationally dismantled 40 years of social standing in a matter of days?" "You did those things yourself," Jack pointed out quietly. "Through your actions, your choices." Eleanor's grip tightened. On the vase. "Always so righteous, Jackson. So quick to judge. Did it ever occur to you that everything I've done has been for this family? For our position? Our legacy? These properties of hers," she gestured dismissively toward me, "should have benefited the Walsh name. Instead, she hoards them, separates them, flaunts her independence while enjoying all the privileges of our family connections. Those properties were never yours to take," I stated firmly. "I built that portfolio through my own work, my own investment decisions. Your sense of entitlement doesn't override my legal ownership." "Entitlement?" Eleanor's voice rose dangerously. "I have dedicated my entire adult life to building and maintaining the Walsh family's social position. Every charity board, every gala, every carefully cultivated relationship. 40 years of constant, invisible work that neither of you have ever valued." Behind us, Howard appeared in the doorway, his face falling as he took in the destruction. "Eleanor, what have you done?" "What I should have done years ago," she replied, her voice suddenly calm. "Stopped pretending, stopped maintaining appearances for people who don't appreciate the effort involved." She set down the vase with surprising gentleness on the side table still standing. "You know what the most exhausting part has been, Howard? Making it all look effortless. Making everyone believe the Walsh family success just happened naturally, that our position was secure without constant vigilance. No one asked you to dedicate your life to appearances," Howard said softly. "No one had to ask." Eleanor's composure fractured again. "It was expected. My mother made it very clear what marrying into the Walsh family meant. They have the money, Eleanor, but they need our social graces," she told me. "Your job is to elevate their standing, to open doors their mere wealth cannot." The revelation cast Eleanor's lifelong behavior in a new light, the relentless pursuit of status, the emphasis on appearances, the terror of losing position. She'd been fulfilling a role assigned to her before the marriage even began. "That may have been your mother's expectation," Howard acknowledged, "but it was never mine. I married you for who you were, not for what social doors you could open." "Then you were the only one," Eleanor replied bitterly. "The Walsh family welcomed me for my connections, my lineage, my understanding of the social landscape. Your mother made that abundantly clear during our engagement." Jack stepped carefully around a shattered photo frame. "None of that justifies fraud, Mother, or forgery, or theft, or this destruction." "No, I suppose it doesn't," Eleanor agreed, with surprising equanimity. "But when you've spent 40 years living by certain rules, certain standards, and suddenly find they no longer apply, that all your careful work means nothing in the face of legal technicalities and property rights, well, she gestured to the destruction around her. Something breaks. The sound of sirens approached, and Eleanor straightened her shoulders, smoothing her hair with practiced movements. I suppose this is the end, then. The final scene of the Walsh. Family drama. How fitting that it happens in this house, the one place I was never truly welcome. That's not true, I objected, surprised by the accusation. You were always invited here. Invited but not included, Eleanor clarified. This house, your design choices, your financial independence, it all declared so clearly that the Walsh family traditions were inadequate, outdated, that my son's wife would forge her own path, regardless of 40 years of established patterns. Before I could respond, police officers appeared at the door, assessing the situation with professional caution. Eleanor, ever conscious of appearances even now, adjusted her pearl necklace and turned to face them with dignity. I assume you're here for me, she stated, her public persona reasserting itself. There's no need for handcuffs. I'll come voluntarily. Detective Reynolds appeared behind the uniformed officers, taking in the scene with a weary expression. Mrs. Walsh, you're making this situation much worse for yourself. On the contrary, Eleanor replied calmly, I'm finally making things clear. No more pretense, no more maintaining appearances. She turned to Howard. You wanted honesty, didn't you, dear? Well, here it is. The unvarnished truth of Eleanor Walsh, willing to do whatever necessary to protect what matters, even if that means breaking a few rules along the way. As the officers prepared to escort Eleanor outside, she paused before me. You know the saddest part, Melissa? In another life, we might have been allies. You have the same determination I had at your age, the same willingness to fight for what you believe is yours. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Just remember, dear, every choice has consequences, even the ones that seem perfectly justified at the time. With that enigmatic parting statement, Eleanor allowed herself to be led from the house, her posture regal despite the circumstances. Through the window, I watched as she was placed in a police cruiser, her expression composed as flashbulbs popped from a news van that had already arrived. Eleanor Walsh's social downfall now a matter of public record despite all her efforts to control the narrative. Howard stood in the midst of the destruction, looking lost and suddenly much older. I should go with her, he said quietly. Whatever she's done, she shouldn't face this alone. Jack nodded. Go, Dad. We'll handle things here. As Howard left, Jack and I surveyed the damage to our home. Beyond the physical destruction lay deeper wounds, trust broken, family bonds strained, reputations damaged. The careful life we'd built together had been upended in a matter of days. Where do we even start? Jack wondered, picking up a family photo where the glass had shattered but the image remained intact. The three of us with Sophia and Howard. At last year's holiday gathering, Eleanor perfect as always in festive red, her smile revealing nothing of the desperation that apparently lurked beneath. One piece at a time, I replied, beginning to gather broken items. Just like we'll rebuild everything else. Detective Reynolds approached before leaving, his expression serious. Mrs. Walsh will be formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, breaking and entering, and destruction of property. Given the escalating nature of her behavior, the district attorney is unlikely to offer the lenient plea agreement previously discussed. What happens now? I asked, echoing Eleanor's question from the previous day, though with very different implications. She'll be processed and held pending a bail hearing tomorrow morning. Given the flight risk and her actions today, I don't anticipate bail will be granted. He hesitated. You should be prepared for significant media attention. The Walsh family's prominence makes this a high-profile case. After the detective left, Jack and I continued cleaning in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The physical damage could be repaired, The deeper fractures in the family would take much longer to heal, if they ever did. My phone rang. Thomas, calling with an update from the Riverside property. The moving company has returned everything they removed, he reported. Minimal damage, mostly just to the packaging, but there's something else you should know. What is it? I checked the other properties as you asked. Cedar Heights is untouched, but there was an attempt to access the Oakwood units. The property manager caught someone trying to enter with what appeared to be legitimate keys, an older gentleman who claimed to be conducting a maintenance inspection. Did they get his name? Gerald Preston. Does that mean anything to you? The name registered immediately. He's on the board of the Lakeside Country Club with Eleanor, part of her social circle. That's what I thought, Thomas confirmed. It seems Mrs. Walsh was coordinating multiple actions simultaneously. A distraction strategy, I realized, creating chaos on multiple fronts to divide our attention and resources. Despite everything, I couldn't help but acknowledge the tactical cleverness of the approach. Eleanor might be misguided, but she certainly wasn't unintelligent. After ending the call, I shared this latest information with Jack, who shook his head in disbelief. She was systematically targeting everything you've built, he observed. All your properties at once. Not just my properties, I corrected, gesturing to our damaged home. Everything we've built together, too. She couldn't control the narrative anymore, so she tried to destroy it instead. Days turned into weeks as the legal process ground forward. Eleanor remained in custody after being denied bail, her attorney working frantically to negotiate a plea agreement that would avoid a public trial. Howard filed for divorce but arranged for the best possible legal representation for Eleanor, demonstrating a compassion she hadn't shown to others. Sophia and Nathan quietly married at the courthouse with only immediate family present, postponing any reception until family circumstances permitted celebration. The elaborate wedding Eleanor had envisioned, the catalyst for her desperate financial maneuvers, never materialized, replaced by something far more authentic and meaningful. My property portfolio remained secure, the additional legal protections I'd implemented proving their worth several times over as Eleanor's network of social connections attempted various means of accessing or devaluing the assets. Each attempt triggered automatic notifications and investigations, creating a protective web that eventually discouraged further efforts. 3 months after Eleanor's arrest, we all gathered in Judge Carlton's courtroom, not for the social event Eleanor had envisioned when dropping his name, but for her sentencing hearing after accepting a plea agreement. The terms acknowledged the severity of her crimes while considering her age and lack of prior criminal history. 3 years of house arrest, substantial financial restitution, mandatory psychological counseling, and community service focused on financial literacy education for women. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table, still perfectly groomed despite her circumstances, her expression impassive as the judge outlined the conditions of her sentence. Howard occupied the front row directly behind her, his support unwavering, despite their pending divorce. Jack and I sat beside him, our presence complicated but necessary for the family healing that might eventually be possible. As Eleanor rose to be processed for her house arrest monitoring, she turned briefly toward us. For a moment, the mask of social perfection dropped, revealing a complex mixture of emotions, regret, defiance, exhaustion, and perhaps a flicker of recognition that things could have been different had she made other choices decades ago. The pie? Media coverage eventually faded as newer scandals captured public attention. Eleanor retreated to a modest house Howard purchased for her house arrest period, removed from the social circles that had defined her existence for 40 years. Her carefully cultivated network of connections evaporated with surprising speed. Once her power and position were compromised, a painful lesson in the conditional nature of relationships built on status rather than authentic connection. 6 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected invitation to meet with Eleanor at her new home. After careful consideration and discussion with Jack, I accepted, curious about what she might want to say now that the legal battles had concluded. The house was small but elegant, furnished with a few carefully selected pieces from the Walsh family collection. Eleanor received me in a sunlit sitting room, pearl necklace still in place, though more simply dressed than in previous years. Her monitoring anklet was discreetly covered by a fashionable wide-leg pant. "Thank you for coming," she began formally. "I wasn't certain you would." "Neither was I admitted, accepting the offered seat across from her. Eleanor poured tea with the precise movements of decades of social training. "I've had considerable time to reflect on my actions," she said after a moment. "The counseling has been illuminating." "In what way?" "I've begun to understand that my entire identity became wrapped in maintaining appearances, in preserving status. When that felt threatened, I reacted extremely." She met my gaze directly. "I'm not offering excuses, merely explanation." "I appreciate that distinction," I acknowledged. Eleanor handed me a slim folder. "These are the title documents for a small property on Maple Street. It's not much, a duplex I inherited from my grandmother years ago, managed through a separate family trust. I'd like you to have it." I frowned, confused by this unexpected gesture. "Why would you give me property?" "Restitution," she replied simply. "Beyond what the courts mandated. The beginning of amends, if such a thing is possible." She sat down, her teacup precisely. "I destroyed things that mattered to you, things you'd built through your own efforts, as you correctly pointed out. This seems a fitting acknowledgement of that wrong." I examined the documents carefully. Professional instincts, automatically checking for any hidden conditions or complications. There were none. A clean, straightforward transfer of ownership. "There's something else I'd like to offer, though you're under no obligation to accept," Eleanor continued. "My social position may be irrevocably damaged, but I still possess knowledge that might be valuable. Property development in certain neighborhoods, zoning considerations, historical committees with influence over renovation approvals, the invisible architecture of real estate in this city that doesn't appear in any formal documentation." The offer surprised me. "You'd share that knowledge, after everything?" "Precisely because of everything," Eleanor corrected. "My actions cost this family dearly. Perhaps my expertise, developed over 40 years of social navigation, might contribute something positive instead." A ghost of her former precision emerged in her expression. "Consider it a business arrangement if that's more comfortable. My insight in exchange for occasional visits, updates on Sophia, perhaps even, eventually, some role in my grandchildren's lives, should you and Jackson decide to have them." The conversation continued, tentative steps toward something that wasn't quite forgiveness but might eventually become understanding. As I prepared to leave, Eleanor walked me to the door, maintaining the social graces ingrained through decades of practice. "The title restrictions you added to your properties," she commented, almost admiring. "They were remarkably effective." "They were necessary," I replied simply. "Yes," Eleanor agreed with unexpected sincerity. "I see that now. Boundaries, clearly defined and firmly maintained, might have prevented considerable damage had I recognized their importance sooner." She offered her hand in a formal gesture. "I underestimated you, Melissa. I won't make that mistake again." As I drove away, I reflected on how fundamentally things had changed in less than a year. Properties remained secure, lives continued forward, relationships reconfigured into new patterns. Eleanor had been right about one thing. Every choice had consequences, even those that seemed justified at the time. The title restrictions I'd added had indeed changed everything, creating protective boundaries that ultimately forced hard truths into the open. Sometimes I realized the most valuable investments aren't in properties at all, but in protecting what truly matters: integrity, truth, and the courage to maintain boundaries, even against those who feel entitled to cross them. Up next, you've Got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.